On the night before Thanksgiving, 1997, in a salt-breezed coastal town called Seabright, Georgia, the neon along Shoreline Avenue flickered on like a run of dominoes. 25-year-old Mara Keegan slid a pie from her small oven and set it on the counter, right beneath the open kitchen window. She'd moved down from Syracuse 3 months earlier and had decided that this year she'd do Friendsgiving with the other transplants who didn't have family in driving distance. She'd volunteered pies. Too many pies. She showered, did her hair, pulled on black slacks and a velvet tank she only wore when she felt brave. She locked the front door of her first-floor apartment and walked past 3 near-identical houses that had been carved into cheap rentals. People were out, leaning on railings, laughing too loud. Mara liked the noise. It made her feel buffered. There'd been talk about a peeping Tom on their block. No one had a clear description. Middle-aged, maybe, or maybe not. Living close by, probably. But tonight, the balconies were busy, and the little beach town felt like a carnival, and the Ritzford on Bay Street had half-price cocktails. Inside the club, her friend Tessa Monroe shrieked when she saw her and dragged her to the bar. They laughed, they danced, they made plans for turkey and board games. Just after 1:20 a.m., Mara begged off the second bar. "I'm going to be a functioning human tomorrow," she said. She drove home to the quiet end of her street, keyed into her apartment, kicked off the heels, and was asleep within minutes. Sometime after, she woke because she thought she heard breathing that wasn't hers. By late morning on Thanksgiving, Mara missed Friendsgiving. On Black Friday, she missed her lunch shift at the restaurant on the pier. The kitchen guy who called her New York dialed her number. No answer. He drove over, knocked, circled around, and peered through the slat of her bedroom blinds. He thought he saw her legs, motionless. He thought he saw... No. He ran for the phone. 2 Seabright officers arrived, found the front door locked, and stepped through the open kitchen window the way someone else had done hours, maybe a day, earlier. The bedroom door was cracked. In the thin spill of coastal light, they saw enough to call the detectives and string up tape. Detectives Carla Hines and Morton Moe Avery arrived with a pair of crime scene techs. It was a small room. The violence inside it had been relentless. Mara lay against the headboard. The bed, the wall, ruined. On the blanket near her hip, a pair of women's underwear, out of place and bloodied. On the rug, a Zippo lighter stamped with a silver gull. They found her purse with an ID. They didn't find forced entry besides the kitchen window. The obvious suspects formed a ring around the case before the lab reports even printed. There was Adam Vale, the lanky dishwasher from Mara's job, who'd shadowed her around stations and begged her to spend the holiday with him. Obsessed was the word 3 different servers used. When Hines and Avery sat Adam down, he smiled too much. He called Mara elevated, as if describing a painting. When Avery asked how he imagined the killer did it, Adam's face went dream blank. "Probably waited until she was asleep," he said. "Came in the back, you know? I think a knife." He said he had fantasies sometimes. He said he never acted on them. He asked if they could tell him, please, how many times she'd been stabbed. They didn't answer. There was Tessa, the best friend. She cried and said she'd called Mara at 2:15 a.m. to make sure she'd gotten home safe. Phone records later showed no such call. When the detectives tried to follow up, Tessa had gone to stay with an aunt 2 states away and, through a lawyer, declined to help further. The first wave of lab work came back a week later. The blood in the kitchen and on the outside sill wasn't Mara's. A hair on the underwear wasn't hers either. The problem was that the DNA profile didn't hit anything in the database. Proof of someone else, yes, but not a name. Winter wore on. The file stayed open, but Avery and Hines were told to spend their hours on cases where the DA felt he could win in court. Then, in May 2000, 18 months gone, Kenny Rhodes, a bail recovery agent who liked to fish more than he liked to sleep, heard about the reward money Seabright had posted. He started asking around. On a dock one Saturday, he mentioned a name he couldn't pin down, someone the detectives had talked to back then. A teenager who lived behind Mara's place, always on the second-floor balcony with a Walkman on. Both his fishing buddies turned their heads. "Dylan Cross," one said. "He left town weird. Said his kid died in Texas. He doesn't have a kid." Rhodes traced Dylan through a daisy chain of service jobs. Seabright to Tallahassee to Tyler, Texas, then on to Havre de Grace, Maryland. He called Detective Hines. "If you're going to sit on him," he said, "bring a baggie." On July 18, 2000, Hines and Avery watched from an unmarked car as a young man with a buzz cut and haunted eyes smoked behind the back door of a warehouse club in Maryland. He pinched the ember out and tucked the butt behind his ear. He glanced at the street like he felt watched. Then he hawked, spat, and went inside. Avery jogged over with a small sterile swab, collected the shining dot off the asphalt, and drove it to the nearest FBI lab like it was nitroglycerin. The DNA from that spit matched the blood on Mara's kitchen sill and the hair found on her underwear. His name was Dylan Cross. He was 17 in 1997. He lived in the building behind Mara's. He wasn't the peeping Tom, not the one neighbors had glimpsed and whispered about. But he'd watched Mara from that balcony, headphones on, the light from her kitchen making a square on her linoleum. After his arrest, an ex-girlfriend volunteered something police would have found anyway. That gold-stamped Zippo? Dylan's. She'd given it to him for his birthday. Investigators also learned that Dylan's older cousin, almost a brother to him, was serving time in Oklahoma for a knife murder that had been a storm of wounds. When you're 17 and the worst person you admire has done something monstrous, there's a frightening logic to trying to prove you're harder. Here is how the detectives believe it happened, stitched from timeline, forensics, and what could be understood without being lurid. Sometime after 2 a.m., Dylan crossed the sparse lawn behind the apartments, slid in through the kitchen window Mara had left open to cool the pies, and walked the short hallway to a cracked bedroom door. The room was dim, salt air pushing the curtain back and forth a thumb's breadth. He could see that she was sleeping. He could see underwear near her knee, tossed there when she'd climbed into bed. He stood there long enough for his breathing to wake her. There was a grapple. He dropped the lighter. He cut his own hand on his own blade. He overpowered her. He used the knife again and again, far past murder and deep into something else, something that looked like trying to erase a person. He left the way he came, smearing blood on the sill, and ducked to the rear stairs of his own building. He left town within weeks. A jury in 2002 didn't take long. The DNA, the lighter, the timeline, the ex who knew the lighter, the improbable dead child in Texas story, none of it helped him. Dylan Cross was sentenced to life in prison without parole. To this day, he says he didn't do it. Hines never forgot that it took a fisherman with a talent for finding runaways to crack open a case that should have been simple and wasn't. Avery never forgot the kitchen window, open when the cops arrived, open when the killer slipped in, and how small decisions, cool a pie with a breeze, leave a latch unhooked, can become hinge points for an entire universe of grief. Rosa Delgado, up in Vermont, heard about the Seabright case years later in a training class. She thought, not for the first time, about heat that appears where it shouldn't, and harm that walks in where it shouldn't, and how the tidy explanations we write into reports rarely match the ragged edges of what actually happens in small rooms. 2 stories from the 90s. One ends with an ash that shouldn't exist. One ends with a name that took too long to find. Both end with families standing in quiet places, by a creek in Vermont, by an Atlantic shore, trying to speak into air that does not answer back.